When I was 14 years old, I went to visit my grandparents' farm in rural Illinois for a few weeks during the summer. My grandparents lived in an old farmhouse surrounded by fields of corn and soybeans, with nothing but endless stretches of flat land as far as the eye could see. One night, my grandparents and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when we heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like a low growl, almost like a dog, but it was much deeper and more guttural. My grandfather immediately went to investigate, grabbing his shotgun on the way out. My grandmother and I stayed inside, too scared to follow him. We watched from the window as my grandfather walked towards the barn, his shotgun at the ready. As he got closer to the barn, the growling noise grew louder and more intense. Suddenly, we heard a blood-curdling scream, and my grandfather's flashlight went out. My grandmother and I were frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. We waited in silence for what felt like an eternity, but my grandfather didn't come back. Eventually, my grandmother mustered up the courage to go outside and look for him. She found him lying on the ground near the barn, his shotgun lying next to him. He was unconscious and bleeding from a deep gash on his head. We rushed him to the hospital, where he was treated for his injuries. After he recovered, my grandfather told us what had happened. He had been investigating the noise in the barn when something had jumped out at him from the darkness. He had fired his shotgun, but the creature had knocked it out of his hands and attacked him. He described the creature as a large, hairy, and extremely aggressive animal that he had never seen before. The doctors and wildlife experts were unable to identify what kind of animal it could have been. The incident left a lasting impression on me, and I never forgot the feeling of fear and helplessness that I experienced that night. Even to this day, I can still hear the sound of that guttural growl and the memory of that terrifying creature. When I was 12 years old, I went to visit my grandparents' farm in rural Montana for a few weeks during the summer. Their farm was situated in a remote area, with nothing but vast expanses of grasslands and mountains in the distance. One day, my grandfather decided to take me on a hike through the mountains. We packed a backpack with supplies, including water, food, and a first aid kit, and set out early in the morning. The hike was beautiful, and we saw all sorts of wildlife, including deer, elk, and even a few bears in the distance. However, as the day wore on, the weather started to turn. The skies grew dark, and the wind picked up, sending shivers down our spines. Just as we were about to turn back, we heard a loud growling noise coming from behind us. We turned around and saw a massive grizzly bear standing on its hind legs, just a few feet away from us. My grandfather immediately instructed me to climb up a nearby tree and stay there until he could distract the bear. I climbed up as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched my grandfather attempt to fend off the bear with his hiking pole. The bear was relentless, and my grandfather was no match for its massive size and strength. It swiped at him, knocking him to the ground, and then turned its attention towards me, baring its teeth and growling menacingly. I was frozen with fear, unsure of what to do. I could hear my grandfather shouting at me to stay still and not move, but I couldn't help feeling like I was about to become the bear's next victim. Suddenly, I heard a gunshot, and the bear collapsed to the ground. My grandfather had managed to grab his handgun from his backpack and shoot the bear before it could attack me. We rushed back to the farm, where my grandfather tended to his injuries, and we called the authorities to report the incident. The experience left me shaken and traumatized, and I never forgot the feeling of terror that I experienced that day. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the wilderness, even in the most beautiful of places. Since you have made it this far in the video, it would help us a great deal if you could hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. When I was 16 years old, I went to visit my grandparents' farm in rural Tennessee for a few weeks during the summer. Their farm was located in the middle of the woods, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. One night, I was sleeping in the guest bedroom on the second floor of the old farmhouse when I was suddenly awakened by a loud banging noise. At first, I thought it was just a thunderstorm, but as the noise continued, I realized that it was something much more sinister. I looked out the window and saw a group of men dressed in black, armed with rifles, and wearing masks. They were trying to break into the house by smashing the windows and doors with their guns. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I quickly woke up my grandparents and told them what was happening. My grandfather, who was a retired Marine, immediately sprang into action. He grabbed his shotgun and told my grandmother to call the police. My grandfather went outside and started firing his shotgun at the intruders. They fired back, and there was a hail of bullets that hit the house, shattering the windows and puncturing the walls. I could hear the bullets whizzing past my head as I lay on the floor, trying to stay out of harm's way. The gunfight continued for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was only about 20 minutes. The police eventually arrived and arrested the intruders, who turned out to be a group of local drug dealers who were trying to rob my grandparents' farm. The incident left me traumatized, and I never forgot the feeling of fear and helplessness that I experienced that night. Even to this day, I can still hear the sound of the gunshots and the memory of those masked men trying to break into the house. It was a reminder of the dangers that can exist in even the most peaceful and idyllic of places. Thanks for watching, and be sure to leave a comment on your thoughts of the story. Also, let us know if you have a story that you would like to share. We would love to have your story on our channel. Leave a comment or email us.